You ever see a machine refuse to wake up, even when everything says it should? The voice cut through the heat shimmering over the tarmac as the F-16 sat motionless, its gray skin baking under the late afternoon sun. A $40 million fighter jet reduced to nothing more than silent metal, while a ring of engineers in crisp uniforms circled it with growing frustration, tablets glowing green with flawless diagnostics that made no sense because the aircraft still wouldn't start. Ryan Mercer kicked the landing gear with a sharp clang that echoed across the runway. "She's dead," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else, while Lieutenant Daniel Brooks stood nearby with his arms crossed, jaw tight, watching the clock tick down as a scheduled demonstration slipped further out of reach. The distant hum of generators and the faint smell of jet fuel hung heavy in the air, and just beyond the organized chaos stood a man no one had noticed at first, thin, quiet, hands resting loosely in the pockets of a worn olive jacket faded by decades of sun. Ethan Cole didn't look at the people, didn't look at the screens. His eyes stayed fixed on the aircraft like he was listening to something no one else could hear. A technician glanced over and scoffed under his breath. "Who let this guy in?" Another laughed softly, assuming he was just some civilian who had wandered too close to a restricted zone. Brooks finally stepped forward, his voice firm but edged with irritation. "Sir, you can't be here. This area is restricted." But Ethan didn't move right away, his gaze slowly tracing along the fuselage, following invisible lines that only he seemed to understand. The wind shifted, rattling a loose tag near the intake, and for a brief moment the noise of the base seemed to fade around him. Ryan shook his head and turned back to the team, barking orders that sounded confident but carried the strain of uncertainty. "Run the diagnostics again," he snapped. Even though everyone already knew what the screens would say, green across the board, no faults, no errors. Nothing to explain why a machine built to dominate the sky refused to even start. And behind them all, unnoticed and uninvited, Ethan Cole took a single slow step closer to the jet, his expression unchanged, calm, steady, as if he had seen this exact moment before, as if he already knew something they didn't, something the machine hadn't told anyone else. Yet Ryan Mercer wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve, staring at the glowing tablet in his hand like it had just betrayed him, every line of data clean, every system reporting normal, and yet the jet sat there in complete defiance, silent and unmoving. "Run it again," he said, sharper this time, and the nearest technician hesitated before tapping through the same sequence. Fuel flow normal, ignition system ready, electrical system stable. It was the kind of perfect report that should have meant everything was ready to fly. But the absence of sound from the engine made it feel like a lie hanging in the air. Lieutenant Brooks stepped closer, his boots crunching lightly against the gravel at the edge of the tarmac. "We do not have time for this," he said under his breath, more controlled now, but no less tense. "Command is expecting this bird in the air in less than 20 minutes. Ryan nodded but did not look up, his focus locked on the screen, as if staring harder might force the answer out of it. Behind them, the low murmur of other personnel grew quieter, the frustration spreading like a slow ripple as more people realized something was wrong. And still, just a few steps away, Ethan Cole remained where he stood, his attention fixed entirely on the aircraft, his head tilted slightly as if listening past the noise, past the voices, past the technology. A young technician noticed him again and let out a small laugh. "Guy thinks he can fix it by staring at it," he muttered to the man beside him, who smirked but said nothing. Brooks finally turned back toward Ethan, his patience wearing thin. "Sir, I am asking you one more time to step away from the aircraft." His tone was firmer now, the kind that usually ended conversations, but Ethan did not react immediately. Instead, he took another slow step forward, his boots barely making a sound against the heated concrete, his eyes tracing along the intake, then the paneling near the forward fuselage, pausing briefly at a section no one else had paid any attention to. Ryan noticed the movement and exhaled sharply, irritation breaking through. "We are running a controlled operation here," he said, his voice raised just enough to carry. "We do not need spectators." A few heads turned, the tension tightening, but Ethan finally spoke, his voice low, steady, and almost lost in the open air. "You are listening to the numbers," he said, not looking at Ryan. not looking at anyone. But the machine is telling you something else. The words landed oddly, not loud, not forceful, but heavy in a way that made the nearest technician frown. Ryan let out a short breath that almost became a laugh. It is a jet, not a person, he replied, shaking his head. It does not talk. Ethan's gaze did not shift. It does, he said quietly, and for a moment, just a moment, the space between them felt different, like something unseen had settled over the tarmac. The wind picked up again, brushing against the side of the aircraft with a soft, hollow sound, and Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, as if that single note had confirmed something no diagnostic system had caught, something no one else had even thought to look for. Ryan Mercer stared at the panel Ethan had been looking at, his brow tightening, as if the old man's words had planted something he did not want to acknowledge. That panel is sealed, he said firmly, stepping closer to the aircraft and running his hand across the smooth metal surface. Factory torqued, checked twice this morning. His voice carried confidence, but there was a thin edge beneath it now, something unsettled. Lieutenant Brooks folded his arms again, watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. We follow procedure here, he added, his tone measured but cold. We do not guess. Ethan did not respond right away, his gaze still fixed on that same section of the fuselage, the sunlight catching the faintest imperfection. In the metal, something so subtle it disappeared the moment you tried to look directly at it. But he had already seen it, already understood it. He slowly reached out, his fingers hovering just above the surface before making contact. The touch was light, almost careful, like he was confirming a memory rather than discovering something new. Ryan exhaled sharply. Sir, do not touch the aircraft, he said, louder now, drawing the attention of the rest of the team. A few technicians turned, sensing the shift in tone, the air around them tightening with anticipation, but Ethan did not pull his hand away immediately. Instead, his fingers traced along the edge of the panel, stopping at a corner where the alignment was off by less than a fraction of an inch, something no system would ever flag, something no checklist would ever mention, but it was there, and it mattered. It is not sitting right, Ethan said quietly, more to the machine than to the people around him. Ryan shook his head, a short, disbelieving laugh escaping him. That is impossible, he replied. Those tolerances are measured down to thousandths of an inch. Ethan finally looked at him, his eyes calm but certain. And yet it is still wrong. The words hung there, simple and unshaken. Lieutenant Brooks stepped forward, his patience now thinning into irritation. Enough, he said, his voice cutting through the moment. You are interfering with an active operation. He gestured toward the perimeter. Step away now. For a second, it looked like Ethan might comply, his hand lowering slowly from the aircraft, but his eyes did not leave the panel, not even for a moment. And that was when Airman Jake Turner, standing just behind the main group, felt something shift in his chest. It was not logic, not protocol, just a quiet sense that something about this situation was off, deeply off. He had watched the diagnostics, heard the arguments, seen the confidence in the technology, and yet the jet still sat there, silent, refusing to respond. And now this old man, who did not argue, did not raise his voice, had pointed to a single flaw no one else could even see. Jake swallowed, his grip tightening slightly around the small device in his hand, his eyes moving between Ryan, the lieutenant, and Ethan, weighing something he could not fully explain. While the rest of the team dismissed the moment, he felt the opposite, a growing certainty that this was not a mistake, that the answer was standing right in front of them, and they were about to push it away. And as the wind brushed across the tarmac once more, carrying that same hollow tone along the side of the aircraft, Ethan Cole's expression did not change, but his silence carried a weight that made ignoring him feel like the real risk. The tension snapped tighter as Lieutenant Brooks took another step forward, his voice now carrying the full weight of authority. That is enough, sir. Step away from the aircraft immediately. The words were no longer a request, and for a moment the entire tarmac seemed to hold its breath. Ryan Mercer crossed his arms, standing beside him with a look that had shifted from irritation to quiet defiance, as if the situation had become something personal, something that needed to be controlled. We are done here, Ryan added, his tone clipped, dismissive, already turning slightly as if to signal the team to move on, to reset. to try again the same way they had been trying for the past hour. But Ethan Cole did not move. Not right away. His eyes remained locked on that same panel, the same imperfection that no one else had acknowledged. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost soft, but it cut through the noise more clearly than anything else that had been said. "You can keep running your systems," he said, "and it will keep telling you everything is fine." He paused just long enough for the words to settle. "But it will not change what is wrong." Ryan let out a short breath through his nose, shaking his head as if he had reached the end of his patience. "We are not guessing," he replied. "We are working with data." Ethan's expression did not change. "Data does not hear the difference," he said, and that line landed differently. Not louder, not more forceful, but heavier, like something that did not need to argue to be true. A few of the technicians shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the two men, unsure which side of the moment they were standing on. Lieutenant Brooks raised his hand slightly, signaling the security personnel at the edge of the tarmac, a silent order forming, and that was when Jake Turner felt the decision lock into place. His thumb hovered over his device for a fraction of a second before pressing down. His heart picking up just enough to notice, he turned slightly away from the group, stepping back into the thin strip of shade cast by a nearby support vehicle, his voice low as he spoke into the line, careful, controlled. "Sir, this is Airman Turner on the flight line," he began, choosing his words with precision. "We have a situation with the aircraft demonstration unit." There was a brief pause on the other end. Jake's eyes flicked back toward the group, toward the old man who still had not moved. "There is an individual here," he continued. "Name is Ethan Cole." He hesitated for the smallest moment, not because he was unsure, but because something about saying the name felt like it carried weight he could not explain. "He is requesting access." Another pause, longer this time, and Jake's grip tightened slightly as he waited, the distant hum of the bass filling the silence. When the response finally came, it was not what he expected. There was no confusion, no dismissal, just a sharp shift in tone, a question repeated back to him, slower this time. "Say that name again." Jake swallowed, his voice steady. "Ethan Cole, sir." And across the tarmac, completely unaware of the call being made, Ryan Mercer turned back toward the aircraft, already preparing to repeat the same process that had failed them over and over again, while Ethan Cole stood exactly where he was, unmoved, as if he already knew that somewhere, far above the noise and the doubt, something had just changed. The voice on the other end of Jake Turner's call did not hesitate the second time. It sharpened, tightened, like a switch had been flipped somewhere far above the flight line. "Stay where you are," it said, controlled but urgent. "Do not let him leave." The line went quiet after that. No further explanation, no questions, just an order that carried more weight than anything Jake had heard all day. He lowered the device slowly, his pulse steady but louder now in his ears, and when he looked back toward the aircraft, everything felt different even though nothing had visibly changed. Ryan Mercer was already halfway through another diagnostic cycle, his fingers moving quickly across the tablet, repeating steps he knew by memory, chasing a solution that refused to appear. "We will get her up," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Lieutenant Brooks stood nearby, watching the process with a rigid posture, his authority still intact but now edged with something less certain, a faint crease forming between his brows as the minutes continued to slip away. The team moved around the aircraft with practiced efficiency, cables checked, panels scanned, systems reset, but beneath it all there was a growing tension, the kind that came when confidence began to crack, but no one wanted to admit it. And through all of it, Ethan Cole remained still, his attention never leaving that same section of the fuselage, his presence quiet but impossible to ignore now. Like a fixed point in a room that had started to tilt, a technician walked past him and shook his head slightly, whispering to another, "Guy thinks he knows something we do not." But there was less humor in the tone this time, more uncertainty, more doubt. Ryan finally stepped back from the aircraft, exhaling slowly as the tablet in his hand showed the same flawless report for the third time. He looked up at the jet, then at the panel Ethan had touched earlier, and for the briefest moment, his eyes lingered there longer than before, as if something in the back of his mind was starting to question what he had already decided. But he shook it off quickly, tightening his grip on the tablet. "It is not that," he said under his breath. as if saying it out loud would make it true. Lieutenant Brooks glanced toward him, catching the hesitation but saying nothing. The wind moved across the tarmac again, carrying that same hollow tone along the side of the aircraft, a sound so subtle it blended into the background unless you were listening for it. Ethan heard it, his head tilting just slightly, his expression unchanged, but inside that stillness was certainty, not hope, not guesswork, certainty. And then, far in the distance, barely noticeable at first, came the low growing sound of an approaching vehicle moving faster than anything else on the base had moved that day. It cut through the routine noise like a signal, and one by one, a few heads began to turn, not toward the aircraft, but toward the source of that sound. Something was coming, something that did not match the calm order of the flight line. And without looking away from the jet, without reacting to the shifting attention around him, Ethan Cole simply stood there, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. The sound grew louder, no longer distant, a low-controlled engine cutting across the ordered rhythm of the base as a black command vehicle moved fast along the edge of the tarmac. Too fast for routine, too direct to be ignored. Conversations thinned, then stopped. One by one heads turned fully now, technicians straightening unconsciously. Lieutenant Brooks shifting his stance as his attention snapped away from the aircraft for the first time in minutes. Ryan Mercer lowered his tablet slightly, his focus breaking as the vehicle came into clear view. It did not slow as it approached. It did not hesitate. It came to a precise stop just short of the aircraft with a sharp final roll, the engine cutting off instantly, leaving behind a sudden silence that felt heavier than the noise that came before it. The door opened, and General Marcus Hale stepped out without delay, his presence immediate, unmistakable, not because of rank alone, but because of the way everything around him seemed to fall into alignment the moment he appeared. He did not look at the aircraft first. He did not acknowledge the team. His eyes moved across the scene once, quickly, sharply, searching for something specific. Ryan straightened instinctively, stepping forward with a composed expression that masked the confusion building underneath. "Sir, we are in the middle of," he began, but the general lifted a hand slightly, not aggressively, just enough to stop the words before they formed. His attention had already moved past him, scanning the line of personnel until it found exactly what it was looking for. Ethan Cole stood where he had been the entire time, unchanged, unmoved, and for a brief moment that stretched longer than it should have, the two men simply looked at each other across the distance, something unspoken passing between them that no one else on the tarmac could understand. Lieutenant Brooks felt it even if he could not explain it, a shift in the air, a recalibration of everything he thought he understood about the situation. General Hale took a step forward, then another, his pace steady, deliberate, and with each step the silence around the aircraft deepened. The technicians who had been whispering moments ago now said nothing at all. Ryan's grip tightened around the tablet in his hand, his confidence beginning to fracture as he followed the general's line of sight, landing finally on the old man he had dismissed not long ago. Ethan did not salute, did not move to meet him. He simply stood there, his posture relaxed, his gaze steady, as if rank had never been the defining factor between them. The general stopped a few feet away, close enough now that the distance between past and present felt almost tangible, and when he spoke, his voice was not loud, not commanding, but precise, controlled, carrying a weight that settled over everyone within earshot. "You should have called sooner," he said, and it was not directed at the team, not at the lieutenant, not at anyone except Ethan Cole, and in that moment, every person on that tarmac understood something had just shifted completely, not because of what had been said, but because of who it had been said to. Ryan Mercer felt it first, the realization arriving slowly but hitting hard, the quiet certainty that everything he had assumed about the situation, about the man standing in front of him, might have been wrong from the very beginning. No one moved for a full second after the general spoke, as if the entire tarmac had been placed on hold. Ryan Mercer felt the weight of those words settle into his chest, not because of their volume, but because of their certainty. He glanced at Lieutenant Brooks, expecting some kind of correction, some clarification, but the lieutenant said nothing, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on the exchange unfolding in front of him. General Marcus Hale took one more step forward, closing the last bit of distance, his gaze never leaving Ethan Cole. "We thought you were done," he said quietly, not as an accusation, not even as a question, more like a statement that had been proven wrong. Ethan's expression did not change, the same calm, the same stillness, but there was something behind his eyes now, something older, something that had been waiting. "Machines do not forget," Ethan replied, his voice steady, and for a moment the general gave the smallest nod, like he understood exactly what that meant. Behind them, the technician stood frozen, the earlier confidence gone, replaced by something far less comfortable, uncertainty. Ryan shifted his weight, stepping slightly forward, trying to regain control of the situation. "Sir, we have the diagnostics under control," he said, careful with his tone now, respectful, measured, but still holding on to the belief that he was supposed to be in charge of this aircraft. The general did not look at him, did not acknowledge the statement. His attention remained entirely on Ethan. "What do you need?" Hale asked, simple, direct, and that question landed harder than anything else that had been said so far, because it reversed everything. It moved authority away from the system, away from the ranks, and placed it directly in the hands of the one person no one had taken seriously. Ethan glanced briefly at the aircraft, then back at the general. "Access," he said, just one word, nothing more. The general nodded once, then finally turned slightly, his voice carrying across the tarmac with quiet precision. "Clear the area around the aircraft," he ordered, not raised, not forceful, but absolute. The effect was immediate. Technicians stepped back without argument, tools lowered, conversations ended before they could begin. Lieutenant Brooks hesitated for the briefest moment before stepping aside as well, the structure he relied on shifting beneath him. Ryan Mercer stood where he was for half a second longer, his mind catching up to what was happening. Then slowly, reluctantly, he stepped back too, lowering the tablet at his side, watching as Ethan Cole moved forward without hurry, without hesitation, as if he had already walked this path before. The old man reached the side of the aircraft again, his hand rising toward the same panel that had started all of this. And this time, no one told him to stop. No one questioned him. The silence that followed was different now, not filled with doubt or frustration, but with expectation, the kind that comes when something is about to be revealed, something that had been hidden in plain sight all along. And as Ethan's fingers rested once more against the metal surface, the entire team stood watching, not as experts, not as authorities, but as witnesses to something they were only just beginning to understand. Ethan Cole did not rush, his movements slow and deliberate as his fingers traced the edge of the panel, feeling for something that could not be seen on any screen, the metal warm under the sun, carrying a faint vibration that only someone who knew what to listen for would notice. He pressed lightly against one corner, then another, pausing at a point where the alignment shifted just enough to matter. Behind him, the entire team stood in silence, the earlier noise of keyboards and commands replaced by nothing but the distant hum of the bass and the soft whisper of wind sliding across the aircraft. Ryan Mercer watched closely now, no longer dismissing. His eyes narrowed as he followed every movement, trying to understand what he had missed, what all of them had missed. Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his worn jacket and pulled out a small, aged tool, something simple, something that looked out of place against the advanced machinery surrounding it. The metal worn smooth from years of use. He held it for a moment, his thumb brushing along its edge, and for a brief second his gaze drifted, not away from the aircraft, but somewhere deeper, somewhere older. The sound of the wind shifted again, and in that moment the present blurred with memory. A different aircraft, a different time, the air, thicker, heavier, filled with pressure and urgency. His hands younger but just as steady, working without hesitation, trusting instinct over instruction. The memory passed as quickly as it came, leaving behind nothing but certainty. Ethan leaned in slightly and positioned the tool against the panel seam, applying just enough pressure to release the tension that had been holding it in place. There was a soft click, almost inaudible, but it cut through the silence like a signal. A few of the technicians exchanged glances, the sound small but undeniable. The panel shifted by the smallest margin, revealing something hidden beneath the perfect surface. Ethan adjusted it carefully, aligning it with a precision that came from experience rather than measurement, his hands steady, controlled, every movement purposeful. Ryan took a step closer without realizing it. His focus locked on the process, the logic forming too late, the realization that something so small, so overlooked, could stop everything. Ethan finished the adjustment and stepped back just slightly, his eyes scanning the aircraft one more time, not checking, confirming. The silence stretched for a moment longer, the kind that builds just before something changes. Then he spoke, his voice calm, almost quiet. "Try it now." Ryan hesitated for half a second, then turned quickly, signaling to the nearest technician. The command passed without words, the system engaged, power flowed, and for a brief heartbeat nothing happened. The same stillness as before, the same uncertainty, and then, deep within the aircraft, something shifted. A low sound began to build, faint at first, then stronger, the engine coming to life not suddenly but steadily, like something waking up after being held back. The vibration spread through the frame, the air around the jet changing as the roar grew louder, undeniable, unmistakable. The aircraft was alive, and as the sound filled the tarmac, no one spoke, no one moved. They simply stood there, watching the machine respond to the one thing none of them had thought to see. The sound of the engine settled into a steady, powerful rhythm, no longer struggling, no longer uncertain, just smooth, controlled, exactly as it was meant to be. And yet no one on the tarmac moved. No one spoke. The roar filled the air, but it was the silence around it that carried the weight. Ryan Mercer stood frozen, the tablet hanging loosely at his side. The flawless diagnostics he had trusted now meaningless in the face of what he had just witnessed. His eyes remained fixed on the panel, on the place where something so small had stopped everything. And for the first time since the situation began, he did not have an answer. Lieutenant Brooks shifted slightly, his rigid posture softening just enough to reveal the realization settling in, not of failure, but of something deeper, something that could not be taught in a manual or measured by a system. Behind them, the rest of the team stood still, their earlier confidence replaced by a quiet respect they had not expected to feel. And at the center of it all, Ethan Cole stepped back from the aircraft, his hands returning to his pockets as if nothing extraordinary had happened, his gaze drifting once more across the fuselage, not searching, just acknowledging. The machine responded with a steady hum, alive again, responsive again, as if it had simply been waiting for the right hands to listen. General Marcus Hale remained where he stood, watching Ethan for a long moment. Then, without a word, he brought his hand up in a clean, precise motion, a gesture of respect that was not performed for anyone else on that field, not for rank, not for protocol, but for something earned long before anyone present had stepped onto that tarmac. The movement was quiet, almost understated, but it changed everything. Ryan saw it, and in that instant, the last piece fell into place. The understanding that the man he had dismissed was not just experienced, not just skilled, but something far beyond what any system could define. Ethan did not return the gesture, not out of disrespect, but because he did not need to. His presence alone carried the weight of everything he had done, everything he had learned, everything he had carried forward into this moment. The engine continued to run, steady and strong, filling the air with a sound that now meant something entirely different. Not just power, but proof that mastery did not fade, did not disappear with time. And as the team slowly began to move again, more carefully now, more aware, Ethan Cole turned slightly, taking a step away from the aircraft, his role complete, his expression unchanged, as if this had never been about proving anything at all, only about doing what needed to be done. And as he walked away from the noise, from the attention, from the realization settling over everyone behind him, the question remained in the minds of those who had just witnessed it, not how he did it, but how many times he had done it before, and how many moments like this had been lost to time, carried silently by a man who never needed to explain.